Hello and welcome to the Inaugural NonSequiturSports podcast. I told you folks earlier this week in the blog post that there was something big coming this week. Now, originally I did think that was going to be my Who's That Quarterback sequence of posts, that new preseason series I have going, where we are going to cover every quarterback for every team in the NFL leading up to the season. That's going to be a lot of fun and you want to stay tuned for it. But that was not the big thing I had planned. The big thing I had planned was I'm going to start a podcast. Now, one of my main reasons for doing this is to avoid what happened last year, when I ended up stopping blogging midway through the year. Part of that was due to the fact that I had an extremely large workload, but the other part of it was I wasn't covering all that I wanted to cover, or I wasn't able to cover all that I wanted to cover. Because it felt like every week I would sit down, I would do the standard, let's pick the games. Oh, what happened on Sunday? Let's preview the Monday night game. Let's preview the Thursday night game. Let's do the power rankings. And honestly, folks, if you haven't done power rankings before, they take a lot of time when there's 32 teams you have to figure out something to say for every single week. Bottom line was, I wasn't able to take the approach I wanted. I wasn't able to take the opinionated approach I wanted to take. I wasn't able to take the approach of kind of an outsider, kind of a person who has an opinion on every little matter. And I wasn't able to go outside football at all either. And I honestly don't see that happening much in my blog post this year. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go outside football that much. I don't want to burn out, but I do still want to give you the best sports coverage that I can. And the only way I can do that, or a better way I can do that, is through a podcast where I can talk about the whole wide world of sports, what I find to be impactful each week across the sporting world, not just in the NFL, but in baseball, in soccer, in hockey when it starts. So this is all for you. This is to hopefully give you a more complete picture of what my views are across the sporting world and to hopefully open up some topics for discussion. Now, before I get too deep into the show tonight, I want to remind any of my new listeners, that if you enjoy what you hear tonight and you want to be part of our community, Non Sequitur Sports, go over to Facebook and just type in Non Sequitur Sports in the little search box. We should show up, like us, and you know what? You'll be a part of a community that already has some pretty knowledgeable sports fans in it. We're a small community right now, but we're hoping to grow. And the more knowledgeable sports fans we have, the better debates we'll have, and the more fun we'll have overall. So please, if you enjoy the podcast tonight, not only like it here on YouTube, but make sure you like it over on Facebook. Make sure you like us over on Facebook. It's going to be hard to like the podcast on Facebook. Anyway, we have a good show planned for you tonight. We have 3 segments. Now, I know I said I was going to branch out earlier, but it started the NFL preseason, so I can't really branch out too much tonight. First segment tonight, we're going to do a little recap of the Hall of Fame game. I know I touched on that a little bit Monday, but I want to talk about it in a little more detail. We're also going to preview the preseason games this week. There are some juicy storylines this week, not the least of which is Johnny Manziel's debut against Detroit. You also have the 49ers and the Ravens taking on each other Thursday night. That should be interesting just from the perspective of the two teams have had so many players crossing back and forth that it could make for an interesting preseason game. You know, preseason games normally aren't interesting, so you look for the storylines where you can find them. Second segment tonight is going to be a topic that is near and dear to my heart, very near and dear to my heart, and that's the return of Brett Favre to the Green Bay Packers. Growing up a Packers fan, obviously I have very, very strong feelings about Mr. Favre. Very, very strong feelings about him leaving Green Bay to New York and then eventually coming back to Minnesota and beating the Packers. However, and I will share with you my perspective, I'll share with you my feelings on the reconciliation, and why I feel Brett Favre, for all that he's done, will always be a Green Bay Packer. For the rest of his life and for all time, he'll always be a Packer. Third topic of discussion tonight, we will finally branch out from the NFL like I promised. We're going to shift gears. We're going to go over to Major League Baseball. We're going to talk about the American League East, specifically the leaders of the American League East, the Baltimore Orioles, a team that has gotten almost no respect from the national media, simply because the national media has decided to conclude the AL East is having a bad year, and the only reason they're concluding that is because the Yankees and the Red Sox are not on top. All right, then. First segment tonight. As I said, I wanted to go back, recap the Hall of Fame game, which was between the New York Giants Buffalo Bills on Sunday night. And there's a couple notes that I want to cover that I didn't really get to touch on in the blog posts. First of all, I did mention this perhaps briefly, talking about the referees and how they were going to call the game a lot tighter in the Hall of Fame game and in the preseason in general, and probably in the regular season as well. The gray area on pass interference calls isn't going to be a gray area anymore. The refs are almost always going to rule in the favor of the wide receiver, almost never in the favor of the defender, which means you're going to see a lot more holding, a lot more pass interference calls. They're going to call it a lot tighter. Now, I will say this for the refs. You could tell it was being called a lot tighter, and you can tell that the defenders are going to have a learning curve. But last night, the calls didn't feel necessarily obtrusive. Maybe it was because I was expecting there to be more calls. But I don't feel like the calls negatively affected the game. In fact, I felt like the game was a little more controlled. There was no controversy in a lot of those penalties. Overall, I felt like the refs handled it well. And I don't think you're going to see a huge difference in the way games are decided. Now, you're going to see a difference in the way games are played. Teams like Seattle are going to be hurt by this a lot because they're not going to be able to be super physical on every single play. The rule that hurts more than the tighter calling on the pass interference is going to be the tighter enforcement of the illegal contact, which means contact beyond 5 yards rule. Now, that has been kind of softly enforced. It wasn't softly enforced in the years after it was instituted. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I think the enforcement's gotten a little lax. I really do think the NFL is just stepping it back up to post-2004 levels. Now, whether or not that is a reaction to the way the Super Bowl was decided, that's above my pay grade. I'll let the NFL and I'll let the experts figure that out. But I do think you'll see a different game. I don't think it will impact how games are decided. That's just my opinion on the referee situation. Now, the other thing I wanted to touch on was just something I happened to notice last night. Now, I'm obviously watching the quarterbacks more closely than usual for my Who's That Quarterback section. And the one thing I noticed is that these quarterbacks seem to be afraid to just chuck the ball out of bounds. Nassib had 2 passes. Ryan Nassib, the New York Giants backup quarterback, he played very, very well He played very, very well Sunday night, folks. But he had 2 plays where he just threw the ball into the dirt. Now, one of them, they were both on play action. One of them was actually called intentional grounding. The other one, I think, could have been intentional grounding. He just threw him into the ground. Well, that's all well and good as long as you know you're outside the tackle and you know there's no defender. But if you're outside the tackle box, just chuck the ball out of bounds. You don't need to keep it in play. I really have a problem with quarterbacks throwing it away but still keeping the ball in play. Maybe it's one of my pet peeves, but I think it can really hurt you, and it almost did hurt Buffalo last night. You had Thad Lewis on the final drive. He's just trying to get rid of the ball. He throws it basically into his offensive line. It bounces off an offensive lineman's foot, goes airborne, and is nearly picked off by the Giants. Now, yes, the Bills will lose because of Thad Lewis's poor pocket awareness, if you will, because on the sack fumble, I think he could have stepped up and escaped the pressure, but he didn't seem to feel the pressure at all. But honestly, guys, quarterbacks, throw it out of bounds. It's not going to be the end of the world. Don't throw it away by keeping it in play, because if you do that, you're not really throwing it away. Food for thought, guys. Food for thought. There. Also, really impressive. I did mention this in the article. Bryce Brown, 40 yards on 7 attempts. That by itself, it's good. Those are good numbers. That by itself might not look overwhelmingly impressive. It's not the greatest Bills offensive line. He wasn't running behind the first offensive line. His explosiveness, it was impressive in Philadelphia. It's impressive in Buffalo. So long as the kid doesn't fumble. This Bills backfield is one of the best in and not just the AFC, it's one of the best in the NFL. If they could get consistent quarterback play, their defense is good enough. That team could actually push the top teams in the AFC East. For the Giants, really impressed by what they did offensively last night. Really impressed by the route trees. Really impressed by the fact that they were just set to get the ball out quick. I've been impressed with the pace they played with. Ben McAdoo, coming off the Mike McCarthy coaching tree, he's going to believe in fast West Coast style offenses. They're going to run the ball. You're going to see a lot of screens. If they execute it, that offense is really, really tough to stop. I think the Giants are actually better set up to play that type of offense than the Packers are because they are more physically weighted offensively. They're just naturally more set up to play that offense. Now, the Packers have gotten there over the years. The Giants are built to play that fast West Coast style of offense. So it's going to be really interesting to see what New York can make of it this year, because I think their prospects are also very high as well. Looking ahead to the first week of the preseason, and perhaps the games you should be watching each night, if you decide you want to, watch a preseason game each night. For Thursday, I mentioned it in the opening, but 49ers-Ravens catches your eye, just because those are two really good teams. Ravens coming off an off year, 49ers obviously coming off an NFC title game run, almost back-to-back Super Bowl trips. Now, I did say in my NFC West preview, I think the 49ers are going to take a dip this year, and I think it's because they lack depth. The Ravens, coming off a disappointing year, I think their arrow is pointing upwards. I really do, but the struggle for both of these teams is the same. It's their depth. So the starters are not what you want to watch in this game. It's going to be the second-string guys. The team, if there's one of these two teams, if their second-string guys look dominant, that's the team that I think's arrow is pointing really up. Looking ahead to Friday, well, you better get 2 TVs on Friday, or have your computer set up with the NFL Preseason Live and your TV set up with the NFL Network game, assuming they're showing one of the 2 games I'm about to say. Buccaneers-Jaguars. I think that's a game worth watching because of Blake Bortles. Simply because I want to see the kid play. I think he is one of the most NFL-ready quarterbacks in the draft. Not the most, because I think Derek Carr is the most NFL-ready quarterback in the draft. But I think Blake Bortles was a great pickup by Jacksonville. I think he has a very high ceiling, and it will be interesting to see how he does in his debut. Buccaneers, Lovie Smith. What's that defense going to look like? I don't know. It's the preseason. They're not going to do anything dramatic. But it will definitely be worth watching. Seeing if that Buccaneers team is playing with, I want to say, maybe a little bit less reckless abandon, a little more structure. Because Lovie Smith always brings the structure. The other game, Friday night, that I think you should tune in for, Oakland Raiders, Minnesota Vikings. Already mentioned Derek Carr, how I think he's the most NFL-ready quarterback in the draft. Hopefully, the Raiders will see that. Also going to be an important game that Matt Schwab comes out and he has a good first series. He might only play 1 or 2 series, but it's important that he plays well in the preseason. I don't care if it's short little dump-offs, high-percentage passes, or deep touchdowns. He just needs to get his confidence back. The Vikings are also interesting because of the quarterback position, because they have a 3-man quarterback race. Teddy Bridgewater, Matt Castle, and Christian Ponder. I don't know who the favorite there is. I might give a little bit of a nod to Bridgewater because he's an unknown quality and he can run. Castle's proven that he's an average NFL quarterback. Depending on the talent around him, he can be good. If the talent around him isn't very good, he's not going to raise it any higher. Christian Ponder has never really been that impressive. He has his good days and his bad days, but generally he never averages out to anything more than an average quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see because Teddy Bridgewater, that is a winnable job for him. I think he can come out of that competition with a starting job. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. Saturday night, well, there's only 4 games on tap. The game of interest is obviously going to be the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions, for no other reason than Johnny Manziel. Now, there's been a lot of buzz this week about Mr. Manziel getting to take over the first team offense for Cleveland. And NFL Network and ESPN have made that to be a way bigger story than it ever should have been. Going into camp, the Browns said, this is going to be a fair and even quarterback competition between Brian Hoyer, and Johnny Manziel. If you do not give Johnny Manziel any first-team reps, it's never going to be a fair and even quarterback competition. I think the plan all along, give Hoyer first-team reps week 1, give Manziel first-week reps number 2, have Hoyer start with the first team week 1 of the preseason, have Manziel start the game second week of the preseason, have your quarterback by the third week of the preseason. I think that was always the plan. It's not a big deal that he's practicing with the first team guys. It had to happen at some point if it was going to be a fair and open competition. Elsewhere, just another game looking at, might be worth tuning in. Dallas Cowboys are always fun to watch. You had a Super Bowl rematch in the preseason between Seattle and Denver. That's not going to be nobody's going to play their starters. That's not going to be much. That's not really going to be worth watching. Cowboys Chargers could be interesting just to see how those two teams look. Cowboys 8-8. Kind of want to see how their depth is coming along. Chargers going to be a really interesting quality this year. I mean, they could compete in that West, but you're not going to learn a lot from a preseason game for those two teams. Really, the preseason is a time to watch rookie quarterback competitions, and see how they'll mesh together with their new teams first week of preseason. So that's why I gave you the games that I gave you. I suggest you watch them. At least watch one of them each night. Tell you what, you watch 2 games though. The 2 games I would give you: Raiders, Vikings, Browns, Lions. Those are the 2 games I'd watch. Probably going to be the 2 games I do watch. So, one other piece of business in the NFL today was the signing of Andy Dalton, Bengals quarterback Andy Dalton, Mr. I Can't Perform in the Playoffs, Andy Dalton, to a 6-year, $96 million extension. And if he does well in the playoffs, big if, it's Andy Dalton, could potentially go up to a $115 million contract. Now, I'm not saying Dalton is a poor quarterback, because he's a higher-end quarterback in the NFL. I am saying he doesn't perform well when A, under pressure, B, in the playoffs, or C, when facing a quality defensive unit. Now, if you're going to take an elite quarterback, if you're going to be an elite quarterback, those 3 situations I just mentioned, you need to perform in those 3 situations. I don't care if you have a bad game here or there, but when the pressure is on, when you're facing a good team, when you're in the playoffs, you better perform. Otherwise, you're not worth the money. And Andy Dalton, I'm sorry, I can't see him being a Bengal going into his 11th NFL season. There can be little doubt that there's been some high drama in the NFL over the last few seasons. Been a lot of players going to a lot of different teams, coming back, playing their old teams, a lot of rivalries, a lot of close games, a lot of comebacks. But for one fan base, for one team, there was only ever one drama that ever mattered, and that's the Green Bay Packers and Brett Favre. When the Packers made the decision to part with Favre in 2008, they had no idea it was going to balloon into probably one of the ugliest sports divorces on record. We all know the story by now. Favre retired, kind of forced to retire by the Packers. Then that summer he says, hey guys, I want to come back to training camp. You got to make me the starting quarterback though. Packers have already decided the train has left the station. Aaron Rodgers is going to be the starting quarterback. And so they say, okay, Favre, you can come back, but you have to compete for the backup job. You have to compete for the starting job. Well, he didn't like that. He demanded to be traded. Packers oblige him, trade him to the Jets. He has a decent year, misses the playoffs. And then he wants revenge. He goes to Minnesota. plays for the Vikings. He beats the Packers twice. Then he makes a classic Brett Favre throw in the NFC title game. And the Vikings do not make the Super Bowl. Favre's last year, absolutely terrible year in 2010. When he decided to leave football, finally leave football, I think everybody knew there was going to be a reconciliation between Brett Favre and the Green Bay Packers. It happened on Monday, with the Packers making the announcement that they would induct him into the Team Hall of Fame in 2015 and retire his number in 2015, a year ahead of what will probably be his induction to the NFL Hall of Fame in 2016. So Favre will be forever remembered as a Green Bay Packer. His number will never be worn again in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So how does that make Packers fans feel? Well, I can tell you as a Packers fan who grew up watching Brett Favre every Sunday, it makes me feel pretty good. Now, when he went to the Vikings, I was the first person speaking out against him, first person backing Aaron Rodgers. I was crushed. Favre was my childhood hero. The way he played the game, the way he had fun, that is how I always envisioned people should play football. When I was outside in the backyard throwing the ball around, I was always Brett Favre. To see your hero go to the team that you hate the most and beat you changes your perspective on things, and it does hurt on some level. Especially because of what Favre was. Favre was the man who brought the Packers back from the dead. In 1992, going into that season, the Packers had made the playoffs once in 20 years. They were a non-factor. People thought free agency was going to kill the team. First modern professional sports franchise to go defunct. Can you imagine what that would have been like? And then Favre shows up. Favre, 3-time MVP, leads the Packers to the Super Bowl. That's all a little before my time, before I could really consciously process what was going on. The Brett Favre I grew up with was already a legend. He was the man. He was the Iron Man. He never missed a game. It was a party every week he played. And he'd always take us to the playoffs, and he'd always break our hearts by throwing some late interception. We watched on Monday night, the Monday night game after his father died, the performance he put on. We were all there for it. Every time he choked in a late season playoff game, we were always there at his back. Because he was Brett Favre. He was our guy. He was a Packer. And it didn't matter how many times the Packers failed, because they're the Packers. You knew they were going to fail eventually. But we loved him because he was ours, and because he was always loyal, and because he was the definition of what a Green Bay Packer should have been. And that's why it caused such a rift when he went to Minnesota. And I think the moment where he realized that he had lost something special was when he threw that interception in the NFC title game. And the Vikings fans, instead of welcoming him back with open arms, when he started struggling the following season, were ready to boot him out the door. That would never have happened in Green Bay. Favre had a year in Green Bay. Packers went 4-12. He threw 29 interceptions. And in that last game, fans were still holding signs saying, "Please come back. One more year, Brett. Give us one more year." He was ours, as Packers fans. He was our quarterback. Rodgers, great quarterback. He can't recapture the magic that Brett Favre was. I think somewhere along the line, Favre realized that he was a Packer. And as soon as he realized that, I know I as a fan could welcome him back. And I know the Packers as a fan base could welcome him back. And I really hope that when he comes to Green Bay for his retirement ceremony, his number retirement ceremony in 2015, I hope he gets the loudest cheer that's ever been heard inside Lambeau Field. It's a reconciliation that needs to happen. It's a reconciliation that's always needed to happen. And I'm glad it's finally happening, because he gave us, as fans, everything he had. He was always ours before he was a Hall of Famer. And Brett Favre was always a Packer. So that's why I think this is great, and I think it's something that needed to happen, and I'm very, very glad that it's happened. I'm sure there's Packers fans out there who disagree with me. I'm sure there's Packers fans out there who think his crime was unforgivable. But to them, I'm saying, when have you ever wanted to prove somebody wrong? Because that's all Favre wanted to do with the Packers. He wanted to show them he could still play. And there's nothing wrong with being human. And he should never have been crucified the way he was for it. Alright, folks, so now we got the serious Brett Favre matter out of the way. And now it's time to finally leave the NFL and go on to some baseball. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, Baltimore Orioles, at the time of this podcast being made, 63-48, 4 games in front of the Toronto Blue Jays, who are at 60-53. Orioles have a winning percentage of .568, which is good for third best in the Major League, behind only the Oakland Athletics and the Los Angeles Angels. And yet, they're only winning the American League East because the American League East is having a down year. Now, I have long known, I'm not naive, I know the national sports media only covers the big market teams. You're never going to see Ed Werder stationed outside anyone but the Dallas Cowboys facility. He's not going to go be stationed outside the Jacksonville Jaguars facility. He's not going to go be stationed outside the Kansas City Chiefs facility, mainly because he doesn't live in those two states, but basically the NFL would never have a stakeout in front of another team's facility, like Ed Werder always seems to do in Dallas whenever something's going on down there. Now, that's just one example. We know how much ESPN loves to cover the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox. And I bet they are having a rough year in regards to baseball. Because the top teams, kind of what you'd expect. I mean, there's an LA team in the NL West, and the Washington Nationals, and LA is in there, and Detroit isn't really a big market anymore. But you're looking at Baltimore, Toronto, Detroit, Kansas City, Oakland, and LA are the top 2 teams in each division of the American League. Now, of those markets, I can only pick out 2 markets, Detroit and LA, that are large, and LA is a split market. So, of course, they're looking for a big story. Baltimore is not a flashy team. They're a team that has a lot of pieces. They don't have any real stars. I mean, they try and turn Chris Davis into a star, and he starts batting under 200, so maybe the Orioles don't want to have stars, but they're just a team with pieces. Oakland is a team with pieces, although Billy Beanes decided to forego sabermetrics and just bring in everybody with an arm that he can find. I don't think that's going to work out too well for him. But that West loaded with pitchers. It's been pitching in the American League, not hitting, and that is what has stung Boston. That's what has stung the Yankees. That's what stung Tampa Bay, because all their pitchers got hurt. But the American League East is not so much worse than any other division. It's better than the Central. I mean, if you took Kansas City out of the Central, they're the number 2 team in the AL Central. You took them out of the Central, you put them in the East, they're in 4th place behind the Yankees. You took Seattle, the 3rd place team out of the AL West, put them in the East, they're in 4th place behind the Yankees. You took any other team out of any other division except the NL Central, they're behind the Yankees. Now, the NL Central is really the best division in baseball. I'm not trying to make a case that the AL East is the best division in baseball. I'm trying to make a case that people need to stop acting like it is somehow a terrible division, and that's the only reason that the Orioles are winning. Because the Orioles actually have the best series record in baseball since June. It's like 14-3-2 or something. It's unbelievable. They've played unbelievable baseball. And they're not getting any credit for it because they are not the Yankees. They're not Boston. Additionally, I think the Orioles get a bad rap because they don't win with sabermetrics. Their numbers, if you look at their numbers, according to MLB, just based on pure runs, MLB.com, Orioles should be 59 and 52. That's pretty good. It is also 4 games under where they're actually at. And in 2012, that number was hilarious because it said the Orioles should have a losing record. Now that team defied all logics. I don't even know how you could classify that team. The Orioles, against the best team, against what many consider the best division in the American League, the AL West, the Orioles are 21 and 12 against the American League West. Now, you want to tell me that's a bad baseball team? I don't think anybody's really saying the Orioles are a bad baseball team. But you're telling me that's a baseball team that's not worthy of national attention? Because they certainly are. Now, yeah, I'm not saying, like, it should be Orioles everywhere. And they have gotten more primetime games, but they've gotten primetime games against the Yankees and the Red Sox. Put a game on ESPN between Baltimore and Toronto. Put a game on ESPN between Baltimore and Detroit, you know, when it happens. I'd rather see that than them playing Boston, a team that can't hit their way out of a paper bag right now. You know, it frustrates me. It doesn't matter who the team is. When a team is not getting national attention, when a team is not getting the attention it probably deserves, when it is one of the best teams in that respective sport. You cannot say you are covering a sport if you do not talk about the best teams in that sport. And right now, the networks that we trust to cover our sports are not covering the best teams in the respective sport, at least in regards to baseball, because they're not talking about the Orioles. They're not talking about Toronto, who is actually, you know, they're 4 games back of the Orioles. They're the second wild card right now. Oh, and by the way, you think the AL East is bad? The Yankees are the team behind Toronto for the second wild card right now. So yeah, AL East, not so bad after all. So give the Orioles some credit for winning that division. And stop talking about that division like it's a bad division, you know. Tampa Bay and Boston are bad. The Yankees are having an off year. The Yankees have been having an off decade, let's be honest. Baltimore, Toronto, and the Yankees are all good teams. But Baltimore is really, really good. And with that, I'm out of time for tonight, but thank you so much for listening to the Inaugural NonSequiturSports podcast. Make sure you come over to Facebook and, you know, like the page. I know you've probably bombarded with requests like that all the time to like the page, but seriously, if you like the podcast, that's how you let me know. Like the video. Well, it's not really a video, but just like the video on YouTube. Maybe subscribe so that you get our podcasts if you enjoyed it. And go like us on Facebook. I'm not asking too much. At least I don't think I'm asking too much. Hope you folks have a wonderful evening. Thanks for listening. Follow the blog. And come back next week. We'll have another great show for you. Thanks a lot.